Welcome back to the MovieBabble Podcast. This week you've got myself, Collin, and I'm joined by Nick as we talk about the opening weekend for Gemini Man, as well as the Addams Family, Jexy, Parasite, Little Monsters, and El Camino, a Breaking Bad movie. And remember, as always, you can check us out online at MovieBabbleReviews.com. So, this week's top 5 is led again by Joker with $55 million domestically, followed by the Addams Family opening up at $30.29 million, followed by Gemini Man in the number 3 spot with $20.5 million, Abominable in the number 4 spot at $6.1 million, and Downton Abbey in the number 5 spot, rounding out the top 5 with $4.9 million. So Joker only had a 42.8, almost 43% drop, which is pretty solid, just considering it is a rated R movie and considering it hasn't been just the best received. I would say overall it's had positive reactions, but they're still pretty mixed at that. I've seen a lot of Joker's the best thing ever, but I don't think everybody's that way. I think it's just a very vocal minority. But it's still impressive. I mean, 55 million in your second week is an R-rated indie-ish, just in the sense that it's not a very traditional superhero movie. It's impressive. That's it.
Yeah, it's doing really well. I'm actually really surprised that it's doing this well in its second week, because when I saw it, I thought the curiosity factor of all the discussion around it and just all these different things was going to propel Joker to a really high opening and then maybe a large drop off from there, because it's just a bummer of a movie. There's one joke in it, and I think it's very poorly timed. So I just expected a 60+% drop, but hey, good for Joker. I'll eat my words on that one. It's doing really well, and we live in a world where a standalone Joker movie is going to gross more domestically and maybe probably worldwide than a Justice League movie, which is really funny to me. That just kind of shows how no one really liked Justice League, and that movie was just kind of doomed from the second that they started rewriting the script and all that stuff. So really interesting for Joker there. But so we're in this time now where it's all right, so how well is this movie going to do? So it's sitting at over 500 million worldwide, and it's just doing crazy business. So it's open to everywhere. But the one interesting little piece to all of this is that it hasn't had a Chinese release yet, and there's nothing on the docket as of yet. So it's interesting there, because we'll kind of see just the top end of what Joker can do kind of depends on that, right? Because China is turning into one of the biggest areas of release for big companies like Warner Brothers and for everyone else. But as we know, China has very interesting ways in which they have a really interesting board for that decides what movies can be shown in China and which can't. So I'm curious if Joker even has a shot to be released in China, considering it's very R-rated and a lot of violence, and there's a little bit of nudity in there, and there's just one. I went down a rabbit hole when I was reviewing this. I was like, okay, what is the possibility of Joker getting a release there? And it seems like the board has very just weird rules. So one of the weirdest movies that was banned from China was Christopher Robin last year, which is just what is that? So apparently, I had never known this before, but Chinese bloggers were comparing Xi Jinping, who's the president of the People's Republic of China. They were comparing Winnie the Pooh to him just because they look similarly, which is really funny. So by the power of memes, China was like, no, we will not. We will have no Winnie the Pooh in our country. So what does that mean? So all this is to say that the Chinese board and what they allow is just very strange. They have rules about violence and nudity and just subject matter in general. But it seems like it's on a case-by-case basis, and it's kind of arbitrary. So very interesting. I really don't know what kind of is possible there. We'll just kind of have to wait and see that if news comes along and says, "Hey, we got Joker has a Chinese release," because I have no idea of deciding when or not this is actually going to be a thing. So yeah, all in all, Joker really solid, and you really can't complain whatsoever.
Yeah, and I think Brennan was the most optimistic on just how well it would perform overall. I definitely still think it's going to be pretty top heavy, especially with its struggles getting into China, because China is just a huge box office market. Like China is what makes Endgame the biggest movie ever. It's really what carries these big movies after their first initial weeks. And so I mean, it's made a ton of money, so it's already a huge success and just ridiculously successful at this point. But I think it's going to slow down quite a bit, especially as it struggles to get into China and as some of the momentum dies off stateside. But it is still making ridiculous money. It is only about 115 million behind Justice League, which is just crazy because you figure Justice League features, I mean, the three most iconic comic book characters probably ever, and is barely going to beat Joker after the second week. So it's just Joker's a phenomenal success. It's going to continue making money. I think it's the right approach for DC. I'm glad to see them actually trying new stuff to really pay off and be rewarded with it, instead of just shoehorning more Justice League into the mix. And so I'm glad that even though I don't think it's, necessarily as great as the world seems to think, it's still kind of proving that DC is right to go in a different direction and at least try something interesting.
Yeah, and I think the main barometer about how Joker's legs moving forward will be next week, because we looked at this week and you have the Addams Family coming out and Gemini Man, which those two movies really aren't going to go head to head with the type of audience that's going to attract Joker. So yeah, we have a lot of movies next week, so that'll be really interesting to kind of see how that changes from there. But yeah, this Joker is a really big deal, and I think its success is going to be a really solid platform for Warner Brothers to push this movie come awards time. Basically, it seems like Joaquin Phoenix is probably a shoo-in to get a nomination in the Best Actor category. That just kind of seems like that's going to happen, and they're going to push really hard. As far as everything else, we'll see there, obviously. It's very early in this process to make any declarations. But yeah, I think this movie, we're going to be talking about this movie for quite some time, because Warner Brothers is definitely, I mean, they premiered it at the Venice Film Festival, and that was a sign that they wanted to do something different with this movie and not just make it a huge box office hit. They want to do something more with it and turn it into an awards contender. So yeah, this is only the beginning. I feel like we're going to have to talk and litigate Joker until next February or whenever the Academy Awards is. We are just beginning there.
Yeah, and I think it was smart for Warner Brothers to release this ahead of the Oscars curve. So normally your Oscar-y movies will start coming out late October, November-ish. And so they got, a full month almost ahead of most of the competition, most of the more serious stuff that's going to be opening up, that's starting to release in a limited theater count now and will be making its wide release over the next couple of weeks. And so it's definitely going to help carry them just through word of mouth, and the box office returns aren't going to hurt much either.
Yeah, and it's really interesting how we're starting to see Hollywood use that first weekend in October as like the first. It's like planting the first flag for Oscar season. So last year we had A Star Is Born, which premiered on that date, which turned into a really big deal, obviously. And then the year before that was Blade Runner 2049, which wasn't as successful, but obviously it still had those ideas in mind, and it was a highly anticipated release. So people are using this date to kind of say like, here's what we have. This is maybe not a tentpole, but it's certainly a very like solid project with a lot behind it. So yeah, it seems like Joker is really kind of just building off of that success, right? Because it's kind of like the opening salvo, because we don't really have anything else yet, and things are starting to circle in. But we have that. What is that? Primacy recency thing where I've probably butchered the idea of that, but it's basically the idea of you remember the first and last thing in some sort of either a movie or whatever. So you have kind of the beginning of October as the start of the award season. So you have a big movie like Joker opening. So maybe this kind of this popularity that it's had really just keeps going for the next few months. It'll be very interesting to see.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be, and we talked about this with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Like, this is a movie that's going to keep popping back up. It's not going away anywhere. I mean, it's a superhero movie, so the internet will be talking about it for a while. And I'm sure award season will keep it pretty relevant. It's not always going to be at the forefront, but it's going to be just kind of hanging around the surface.
Yeah, it's going to be in the top 5 for quite some time, or right around there. It'll be lurking, that's for sure.
Yeah. So, with that being said, we will move on from Joker for now and go to the Addams Family. A little snaps there, just in case. And this is this is the third Addams Family movie, but it's the animated reboot, and it grossed a little bit over $30 million this past weekend, and it's got about a $40 million budget, so it's not doing just too shabbily, not just doing any super business, but it is still making some money, and it has yet to really open overseas, but it is. I mean, it doesn't really have just a ton of animated competition yet. We'll come up into Frozen 2 next month, but it is also a Halloween movie, so that'll help carry it through the rest of this month, especially as we get through the last week of October.
Yeah, though it has a couple weeks before the juggernaut Arctic Dogs comes to theaters, which is the next animated movie. I still can't believe that's a thing. But anyway, Addams Family, it's a really solid start for this kind of movie. And just to give a little background on the business side of things, this movie is distributed by United Artists Releasing, which is a pretty new company, all things considered. It opened at the end of 2017, and it's been working with and distributing MGM films and Annapurna films. So obviously those two production houses have kind of fallen on hard times in recent years. The MGM debacle has kind of been it's just been very out and open, just how badly they've been doing and how much they've been struggling. But so it's all to say that United Artists Releases really needed this kind of opening from the Addams Family, because they've been just distributing Annapurna and MGM movies, which have not been doing well at all. So it's just a really good sign for them as they are maturing as a company and they continue to move forward. So this movie is also distributed by Universal worldwide, everywhere outside of North America. So they'll kind of have to rely on the box office in the States. But yeah, that's a really solid start. You really can't complain. $40 million budget. Actually really impressive for an animated movie to keep the budget that low. But yeah, Addams Family, it's really, really solid start. And I can imagine this movie will definitely have pretty decent legs over the next 2 weeks leading up to Halloween. I mean, obviously reviews weren't very good, so that might put a little bit of a damper on it. But I see this movie being a really tidy little hit, all things considered.
Yeah, and I think it's a really unique example of live action going into animation, because we've seen a lot of the exact opposite coming out of Disney. But I think it really fits for the Addams Family. Like, it's something that was created at a time when you couldn't do just a ton of kind of the monster-y motif in live action. And so just really putting it in an animated world, you can bend the rules and make this family pop a lot more, which I think was a good decision. And I think if we had seen, a live action remake again, I don't think we'd be seeing numbers this strong. I think making it animated was definitely the right step to go in.
Yeah, from the moment I saw the trailer, when I heard the news about this movie, I thought that was just a brilliant idea, because it's the Addams Family. They're all about the macabre, and there's always been like these little kooky things to it that have at least stayed in people's minds, like that finger snap and just other little funny things. So and that really lends itself to animation, and it seems like that paid off because the trailers were really fun and zany and kind of just weird, and maybe that brought a lot of people into the theater. It's doing really solidly, and I just to kind of underscore what I was mentioning before about United Artists releasing. So their 2019 has been very spotty. Maybe not necessarily in terms of the quality of the movies, but definitely in terms of just their box office success. So their first film of the year was Fighting with My Family back in February, which is a pretty good movie. I actually quite liked that a lot. It was a tiny little hit, so we can't complain too much about that one. But then after that was Missing Link from Annapurna, co-produced through Laika, which really struggled at the box office. Then after that was The Hustle, with Anne Hathaway and Rebel Wilson, which is currently it's definitely within striking distance to become one of my least favorite movies of the year. That movie's terrible. Then after that we had Booksmart, which has been well documented as just like a terrible marketing fiasco where it should have been a really big hit and really wasn't. It still made a little bit of money, but they definitely left a lot on the table there. And after that was Child's Play, which didn't quite do as well as they would have hoped. And then after that was Richard Linklater's Where'd You Go, Bernadette, which really struggled during production. Many had a ton of release dates, pushbacks and delays and everything. It was just a production nightmare. So yeah, Addams Family comes at the right time for this movie. It's the last movie they'll be releasing this year, and so hopefully that kind of just ends things on a high note for them as they get back on order for 2020. Because they really needed this one.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a nice, solid success for them. I mean, it's not going to be anything huge. We're not going to be seeing Toy Story 4 numbers here, but we'll see pretty decent numbers, and it does fit that it's a very Halloween-themed movie, and we are coming into the busier half of October in terms of Halloween and just all that holiday stuff going on. So I think it'll see pretty solid weekends throughout the rest of the month. And so with that, we will, with regret, move on to Gemini Man. And that opened at number 3 this week with $20.5 million. This is the Will Smith movie co-starring Will Smith. That honestly, I've probably seen this trailer 20 times. I remember seeing this trailer for the first time in front of Endgame, and I was like, okay, that has potential. And then I've seen the trailer 19 more times and just hated myself every single one of those times. So I am glad to be rid of this. I'm sure Paramount is going to be glad to be rid of this. So it's sitting at about $138 million budget with an opening weekend domestically of $20.5 million, foreign about $39 million. So sitting at about $59.5 million worldwide, which is nowhere near where you want to be with a budget that large for a high concept movie this obscure. So Gemini Man is in trouble. Poor Will Smith.
Yeah, his life is just up in upheaval. Jesus. So this movie is very strange. Very, very strange movie. It's one movie I saw this week, and I am filled with regret for seeing it. It is just a turd. It is not very good. So this movie is kind of in financial peril, as you mentioned there. It's not a very good start, and only just like the one thing it does have left, maybe it has a few regions left. It still has to open in Japan and Taiwan, and I believe Poland is the third one it has to open in yet. And Ang Lee is obviously a Taiwanese filmmaker, so maybe there's a little bit of pull there, which it can make some cash. But obviously, that's not gonna save everything for Gemini Man. This movie is gonna be a tax write-off, very much so, for Paramount. And this movie is just very strange. So I'm going to walk us through this one here. So Ang Lee, just very decorated filmmaker, Brokeback Mountain, just many other great movies. And he's been weirdly fascinated with technology recently in his movies. So Life of Pi, remember he made in 2012, which was a critical hit and people loved it at the time. I don't know if you have watched that recently. It hasn't aged well. Technology it just doesn't look well. It doesn't look good at all after not even a decade. But then after that, he made Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk, which I don't think anyone saw. I know I know I didn't. Um, and then after that is Gemini Man. And so what the last two films have had in common is he's kind of pushed what he started to do with Life of Pi, and he's been kind of working on the technology side of these movies and experimenting with higher frame rates and whatnot. So Billy Lynn had, I believe, was shot in 60 frames per second. And so for those that don't know, the average is 24 for movies. So just everything looks very fluid. That's kind of the issue that The Hobbit ran into when I think that was released in 48 frames per second, and just no one liked it. And it just seemed like that was kind of the same case for Billy Lynn. But like he's still really interested in trying this and kind of pushing what cinema can do. So Gemini Man, he shot in 4K 3D, and it was shot in 120 frames per second. And then just for reference, there's no theater in North America that has the capabilities to show that. So he filmed a movie with crazy technology and now no one can see it as he intended to show it to everyone. So very strange, and it kind of feels like throughout the production of this movie that Paramount was getting cold feet about this. It seems like Ang Lee came into the boardroom, was like, "Hey, I have this idea for this movie, and we're gonna shoot it with all these crazy specs." And Paramount was like, "Great, go make it." And then they were like looking at the budget, and they were like, "Ah, shit, like we can't, like this is gonna be a real struggle." So it's really funny when you watch the movie where basically, like I would say, like one half of the movie is just like it's like a tourism video for Budapest. So they're just like there's just one scene where Will Smith and Benedict Wong and just other members of the cast are just kind of hanging around outside of a Turkish bath, or one of those kind of that looks like that, and they're in robes and everything looks really nice, and they're sipping on like Bloody Marys, and it just you're like, what is this? Like what like where is this? What kind of movie is like what's happening here? And there's some incredible product placement moments where Will Smith is talking to like a CIA higher up, and he's like, "Oh, do you want a soda or a beer?" And he has a Coke in one hand and then a Stella beer in the other hand, with labels both prominently placed at the center of the frame. And then later in the movie, like they have like a little, they're trying to do like a cute little callback to that moment where he just plops a Coke right in front of the same CIA agent, and this is done in a medium close up, so it's basically the only thing you see in the frame. And so Will Smith places the Coke can in the middle of the frame, and then the can is turned ever so slightly so that you see Coke just pointed right at the camera. It's incredible. It's just like one of the most ballsy things of product placement I've ever seen in a movie. It kind of feels like Paramount was like, shit, we have a turd on our hands. We need to increase our bottom line somehow. So it's just so weird because you see all these moments where there's a motorcycle chase in this movie where you've seen bits of it in the trailer. It's actually really thrilling and really incredibly filmed. It's just very virtuosic, and it just kind of just shows how good Ang Lee is. And then you have all these other moments where it's like, this isn't really a movie. This is just kind of a commercial. There's just nothing really happening. So it's just very odd. Gemini Man it feels like it was kind of doomed from the start. I don't really know what they were thinking here, but it is a very, very odd kind of production nightmare, if you ask me.
Yeah, and going back to what you were saying about, so there are no theaters in North America that are playing it as it was designed to be shown. But on top of that, there are only 14 that are even playing it at half the frame rate at 60 frames per second in 3D. So it's just a complete miss on the technology of what you can do to create a movie versus how you can watch a movie. It'd be like putting out 4K DVDs 10 years ago when people were just now getting rid of their VCRs. It just doesn't connect, and I think it's a little too early to try and jump to new technology like that. that and the fact that, I mean, people like what they're used to. So that's why we've never really switched over from 24 frames per second. I mean, they started using 24 frames back when you had to, pay for actual film and it was cheaper that way. And that was about as slow as they could get it before the audience would start to notice. And that's what audiences are used to. It's hard to really switch that up. And I think Gemini Man is just another swift reminder of that.
Yeah, and I really like this idea in theory. I really appreciate someone who wants to kind of expand what we know as cinema and try new things. But I just like the technology isn't quite there yet, and I mean the elephant in the room here is just the CGI, the younger CGI Will Smith, which looks really good in some instances, and there's just other areas which is like, oh, like I'm falling very far down the uncanny valley, and like there's just like this is just not real at all. So we are definitely not there yet in terms of just replicating humans. Very interesting idea though, because I mean the whole idea of shooting it in 4K 3D and all these frame rates is kind of to make it look hyper real. So everything in the movie is basically in focus, and it's very interesting how it's filmed, and he's trying to replicate this look that just movies we just aren't used to in seeing in movies, and it's very interesting, and I kind of like that idea. But yeah, like I feel like we've seen this many times. Like we have to walk before we run is the old saying, and I feel like Ang Lee is trying to sprint and just like falling all over his face, in my opinion. It's really weird because I want to see him do. He's a great filmmaker. Brokeback Mountain is just an incredible movie, and I want to see him do other things like that. But yeah, it's just this movie just isn't very good. And like the last scene in the movie, it's just a very obvious reshoot where they just didn't have an ending, so they have to talk they have to bring their characters all together and have them just like laugh to each other while they're walking through a college campus. Like that's just so weird. And it's obvious, it's so obvious that it's a reshoot because it's like the worst that the CGI Will Smith has looked in the entire movie, and it looks really really bad. It looks like CGI from like a decade ago, and it's really bad. So it's very interesting, and this script has been kind of circulating for a while. Everyone's favorite showrunner David Benioff wrote this script among others. There's a couple screenwriters on here, and I'm pretty sure Tom Cruise was supposed to star in this movie at one point, or at least Ang Lee or Paramount went to him about doing this. So yeah, this has kind of been around for a while, and yeah, it landed on Will Smith, and kind of another just dud in a long history of duds for Will Smith. I mean, we do love him. And we made that kind of make that joke at the top about, oh, his life is terrible now. Oh, how woe is him. But he hasn't really made like a true blue hit in a very long time. I mean, he was in Aladdin early this year, which was incredibly successful. But did anyone really like that movie? I don't really know. And I guess maybe Focus a few years ago was a pretty decent movie with Margot Robbie. But other than that, it's like, his last film that everyone kind of likes was Men in Black back in 1999 or something then. So yeah, it's very strange. And the Gemini Man is just like a culmination of just a lot of weird things that have been kind of going on in Hollywood. So yeah, it's just very, very bizarre on many levels.
Would also like to point out that the one of the other writers for Gemini Man is partly responsible for Shrek Forever After.
Oh, perfect.
So it is quite the group of writers on that. But yeah, Gemini Man it's just seemed like a mess for a while. Everything we've kind of heard about it coming into it, and I mean, even from the trailers, it just seems like they're going for a lot. And based on everything I've heard, it doesn't sound like they have really hit any of their marks.
Yeah, it's very interesting, I guess, when you think about it at like a high level in terms of where are movies going and everything like that, but it's not representative of any of those things because it's just not very good at any of those pursuits. But yeah, very bizarre, and I kind of wish Ang Lee was busy doing some other project instead of stuck on this movie for so many years. It's just rough to see.
Poor guy. So with that, we will finish out the top 5 with Abominable in the number 4 spot. with 6.1 million, and Downton Abbey in the number 5 spot with 4.9 million. We've kind of talked these movies to death at this point. This is the third and fourth week at the box office for them, respectively. Downton Abbey is, again, a pretty big hit. Abominable, not so much. And I think both of them are going to stay that way. So, unless you have anything else to add, we will cover some other new movies this week.
I do not. I'm done talking about those movies.
So we will start off with a movie that I don't think this existed until a week ago. This movie, it's been very clear in the limited marketing I've seen that Lionsgate has been trying to ignore this movie and write it off because they knew what they had on their hands, and that is Jexy, the movie about the evil Alexa that becomes the crazy girlfriend meme. And it pulled in a whopping $3 million domestically, and I've heard nothing but hate for this movie. Just absolute disdain across the board.
Yeah, I saw the trailer for this movie. I don't know. This is a tough one to start. I have no idea how to talk about this movie. It's just so weird to me. But I saw the trailer for this movie when it came out. For some reason, I follow Lionsgate on YouTube. That's just like a weird thing. Little weird peek into my life there. But I watched this trailer and God, it was just like the worst thing ever. Like it really just made me angry. And it was like, why do I even watch movies? It was just so terrible. And it was like, oh, this movie comes out in like a month or so. And it's like, oh God, like this movie has stars in it. Like Adam Devine is a person of note. Like people know him. Rose Byrne is the voice of the titular Jexy. I think Wanda Sykes is in there too, and Alexandra Shipp. And there's actual actors in this movie, and man, it is tanking very, very hard. I'm morbid curiosity. I think is going to get the better of me because I'm really interested to see just how terrible this movie is. But yeah, Lionsgate really was just trying their best to hide this one, and yikes! It's just I don't even want to think about what they're gonna have to deal with tomorrow and Monday when they go into their boardroom and kind of just look at how terrible this movie has flopped and how no one really likes it. Really rough, really rough stuff for Lionsgate.
Yeah, looking at residuals and returns for this is not going to be a fun task.
It's so weird too because I feel like ever since Workaholics, like Hollywood has tried to make Adam Devine into a thing. Like they've really tried, and he's been in so many things. Like I thought he was pretty good in the role he had in Pitch Perfect. I mean, he was kind of an extension of that Workaholics character, where he's just a very loud, brash, just kind of just goofy guy, and he's really funny in those movies. And then after that, it's like he's had a couple of Netflix movies, like that Game Over Man, and it's like When We First Met, which was like a weird rom-com with Alexandra Daddario that no one liked. Now he has this movie. It's like I don't really understand what Holly like. Obviously, he's a funny guy, but it just seems like no one can really figure out how to use him correctly, just in terms of just films. I mean, he has a lot of HBO stuff going on right there. I know he's in The Righteous Gemstones at the moment, and that seems to be a big hit for people who watch it. But yeah, it's just very strange. It's really weird because like the tagline for this movie is like "She's the captain now," which is a reference to Jexy, and it's like the Captain Phillips thing, and it's like that meme like stopped being funny like in like 2015. So it is just so bizarre. I just don't understand this movie. I can't even like articulate just how weird this thing is because it is just so strange. I just don't understand why it exists at all.
Yeah, and I think Adam Devine is a really good supporting actor. But he just doesn't seem. His movies don't seem to connect when he's in the lead. So like Workaholics, is much more of an ensemble show. Righteous Gemstones, he plays like second or third string, and I mean I love him in that show. Pitch Perfect is kind of the same thing. I think he's kind of like Jai Courtney. They just keep throwing him in movies and are like, you love this guy, and then you watch the movie and you're like, no, we don't. And then some other movie they're a side character and makes a bunch of money, and Hollywood's like, yeah, you love this guy. And then it's just back and forth of, you love this guy, and no, we don't. And I think Jexy is just Another round of that going around.
Yeah, it is just truly bizarre. It's one of the there's a few outliers that come out at the end of the year where I mean you have all of these just great movies coming out. We're going to talk about Parasite comes out next week. And you have like the things like The Lighthouse and all these really artsy and interesting movies. And you juxtapose with that, you have movies like Jexy, which are just unabashed turds that other companies are just trying to bury beneath all these other really good movies, and then just write it off for their end of the year taxes. So yeah, there's kind of a weird thing. There's a couple others coming out. Arctic Dogs seems like that might be one in a few weeks. There's always a really just terrible movie at the beginning of December that comes out. I think this year it's The Boy 2. It's like The Boy 2 Brahms. Remember The Boy hit movie from a few years ago? That movie's getting a sequel. And Playmobil is coming out in December. Feels like we've been talking about that movie for 10 years and it keeps getting pushed back. And that's finally going to come out. So yeah, this is one of many movies that companies just don't want you to know about whatsoever. They want them to go away.
Yeah, I can't imagine we will ever talk about or think about Jexy ever again.
I sure hope not. If that happens, then that something is wrong and someone should get us help.
And so with that, we will move on to the polar opposite of movies, which is Parasite, which is currently one of the highest rated, highest reviewed movies of the year. I have yet to hear anything even remotely negative about Parasite. This is something that has kind of been talked about for the past couple months, and it is slowly making its limited release in the U.S. and is just. I mean, I think Parasite is going to be one of the bigger movies to watch come award season. Like it's made a huge splash up to this point, and I mean, it literally could not be more the opposite of Jexy. Like it has just been a huge critical success, and I'm excited to see it as it slowly expands across the U.S.
Yeah, I can't wait. This movie is doing crazy business, just really, really crazy business in its limited release. And so it averaged over 125,000 in 3 screens, which is by far the best per screen average of the year, and it's one of the highest ever. So really good stuff for this movie. And yeah, it seems like I'm kind of in the same boat as you, where we've only heard like incredible things about it. I'm really happy because I've kind of avoided all talk of it, but besides that, it's just really great. So, and that kind of seems like that's like the best way to go into it, where you just know nothing and just get your mind blown. So I really can't wait. And this movie is coming to my area this coming week, and I'm really excited to see it. But in wonderfully fitting fashion, Parasite just received its first rotten review on Rotten Tomatoes by none other than Armand White. Our boy came back just to ruin this movie's 100%. So it is now sitting at a 99. Not that really matters, but it's also really fun just to see that Armand White just kind of just he's just the party pooper once again, just being the ultimate divergent opinion here. So basically, when that kind of thing comes up, this movie is probably going to be pretty great, and I just can't wait. And it's Bong Joon-ho, just one of our better filmmakers. This movie, it's fun because I don't really know anything about it, and I'm going to go into it, and I hope I get my mind blown, like I said earlier. So it's really exciting. We have that with a couple other really fun movies coming out. So this is really cool. This is really very, very, very cool.
Yeah, and we're getting it more on the late end of the spectrum, which is usually the complete opposite, just because this is a South Korean movie. So it actually has a worldwide gross of around 86 million right now, and we're just kind of coming to it towards the end because, there are a lot of hurdles in the way of foreign films in the U.S. market, but I'm glad to see that this has kind of broken through most of those and is really getting a wide release for as great of a movie as it seems to be.
Yeah, and it seems like this is all kind of pushing towards just a very pronounced awards run for this movie. It kind of seems like everyone has said that it looks like it's probably going to win Best International Film. And it probably makes sense because normally one of the most popular foreign films in America end up winning those awards. So it probably has it there. But who knows? Maybe we see this movie kind of breaks out a little bit, and maybe it's a little sleeper Best Picture nomination. You never know. But this is definitely a movie to watch for the weeks and months to come.
100% agree. I'm excited to hear more about it. Unlike Jexy. So,
yes, no more Jexy.
We do have some other streaming for the most part. These two movies did have very limited theatrical releases, but we'll start with El Camino. So it's been 6 years since Breaking Bad ended, and this past weekend Netflix dropped the continuation of Jesse Pinkman's story and did a Breaking Bad movie, which I was really hesitant about at first. I think Breaking Bad is just one of the most consistent series of all time, one of the best endings of all time. It didn't really leave much that needed answering or leave any threads that needed tying. So I was really nervous about a movie being put into the works, because normally that just means that the creator wants more money. But I am really pleased to say that it's really just a sincere 2-hour journey with Jesse Pinkman. You just get to dive into the character. It doesn't really take the story overall in any crazy new directions, which I think is really what works. It still leaves that solid ending to the TV show without really tarnishing anything, but it lets you just explore the characters a little bit more and kind of push them a little bit further in the span of where that story's already at. I think it was just really well done. Just really stuck to its guns. It knows what Breaking Bad is good at, and it didn't deviate from that too much. So I've seen a lot of debate over whether or not this movie was really necessary, and I would agree it probably wasn't, but it's here nonetheless, and it's just done really well, just done really sincerely.
So, as someone, and I'm going to get a lot of shit for this one, but I have never seen Breaking Bad. So, obviously, I was a little apprehensive about seeing this movie. So I'm curious if this movie kind of just stands on its own at all, or if it's kind of one of those where you kind of have to see the show in order to enjoy it, or if it's just a really good standalone character study.
I don't think it stands alone very well, just because you have to know. There's a lot of. It does its fair share of exposition, but there's a lot you'd really have to have at least seen the last season of Breaking Bad. Like, you could probably walk into season 5 of Breaking Bad, watch that, and then watch this movie and be fine. But if you're coming in completely blind, I don't think this movie really stands alone. But I also don't think this movie was really made to. I think Netflix knew who they were targeting, knew who was going to watch it, and I think it was a pretty solid move for them.
Yeah, and it's really interesting to kind of see this movie just tracking it up to its release, where this is kind of just another step in kind of like the kind of ever just melding of just content in terms of just TV and film coming together and kind of not being as different as they were in probably previous decades, where we see now one of the best TV shows ever kind of gets its own film, and we're kind of just playing with the form in all senses of the word, and kind of just we're just another way of just showing how we're kind of moving just towards storytelling in general, and the lines are blurring, and we don't really need films or just these long-winded TV shows. It's very interesting kind of to see Breaking Bad play with the form in this way. It's very cool to see from afar.
Yeah, it was a really well done continuation, and I think having it come 6 years later gives you enough time for the show to really end, and also really look at where its legacy is and kind of see its impact, 6 years later, and coming off the heels of something like Game of Thrones. It's nice to be rewarded by a show that, you're like, yeah, this is the best thing ever. And I just think it was a smart move. They kept it pretty secret for the most part. This movie wasn't really announced or well known until they made it public, and I think it was just a solid move. I don't think it's going to be something that we're going to talk about forever, but it's nice to have. So that is El Camino, and we'll move on to Little Monsters, which was a Hulu release that had a one-night theatrical run, and that is a zombie rom-com starring Lupita Nyong'o, and it's a zombie movie. they're not going to really be too different from one another, but I've heard pretty positive things about it overall, mainly for the rom-com twist it kind of throws into the genre. But I mean, at the end of the day, most zombie movies are going to fall into the same traps.
Yeah, I do think this is another really cool kind of blending of what we know as film and kind of what these streaming services are doing with just content in general. Where this is really cool that a movie like this, which was probably never going to be a big hit in theaters, it got its theatrical release and made people happy because they could say, hey, we were in a movie that played in theaters, but now it's going to find its audience on Hulu and probably be just open to more people in general than it would have ever seen before. Obviously, this isn't the first film to do that, but it's just very interesting just kind of to see Hulu kind of work in this way as well, kind of similarly to things that Netflix is working on. It's kind of very cool, and it's just another way. I think we're probably going to see more independent movies do this in the years to come, where they have a very, very small theatrical release window, and then they move straight to just to streaming and can find their audience there. It's very cool. Obviously, as someone who's kind of a purist and loves to see these movies play out on the big screen, it is really cool to see some of these movies find an audience in more ways than they would have ever done so before. So it's very cool.
Yeah, so that is everything going on at the box office and the streaming box office this week. It's actually a pretty packed week, just not a ton of stuff that's really going to be super successful, super long-lasting, but still pretty busy nonetheless. And next week looks to be pretty busy as well. So we've got Zombieland Double Tap coming out 10 years after Zombieland. We've got Jojo Rabbit with its New York and Los Angeles releases. We've got Maleficent, Mistress of Evil, the movie that just kind of appeared, as well as more of the Parasites expansion and the Lighthouse opening up. So it's going to be a pretty busy week, a little bit of something for everybody. And I think we'll see solid successes across the board. And I don't think we'll see anything that just runs away next week just due to the nature of what's coming out. But I think we'll see pretty decent hauls all around.
Yeah, we're really getting into the thick of things here with all these movies releasing, and it's gonna be really cool. It's fun. We are very much in the fall season and beginning of award season. I love it when we have all these type of movies showing. Yeah, there truly is something for everybody, as you mentioned. We have a big time movie getting its release, and we have a bunch of artsy fartsy movies getting released as well for people like me. It's really cool. I can't wait.
Yeah, so that is this week and a little bit of next week at the box office. So we will again be back here next week talking about Zombieland as well as, unfortunately, Maleficent and some of these other smaller releases. And just remember, as always, you can check us out online at MovieBabbleReviews.com.